Hello and welcome to a special edition of the In the Money Players podcast, part of our daily Breeders' Cup content. Peter Thomas Fornital back with you. Very happy to be here at Keeneland. If you're watching along on YouTube, you can see the lovely colors in the background. We may have a horse walking across that path at some point. So happy to be back here at the Breeders' Cup, where the buzz is always building for this year's Breeders' Cup, has been for quite some time. And one of the most buzzy elements is the international participation. And this is a popular show we've done the last few years, right when we get the pre-entries, is to go through and take a high-level look at the horses that will be traveling to these shores to compete in the Breeders' Cup. And to give that look with us, we welcome in from Sky Sports Racing and from In the Money Media, at least during Breeders' Cup week next week, we have Vanessa Ryle. Vanessa, how are things?
I am very well, thank you, Peter. Yeah, it sounds good to be part of the In the Money Media team. I like that intro. And even just seeing you there on site, honestly, I just can't wait to be out there. It's going to be, I'm so buzzed, and the entries have come out. And there's no real surprises, I don't think, in terms of the English and Irish runners, which is what I've obviously focused in on for you today. I don't think there's any real surprises there, but it's really heightened the excitement now. I absolutely cannot wait.
So we in the Money Media side have been, obsessing about the Breeders' Cup for weeks now. But normal people really start looking once they have pre-entries and pre-entry past performances in their hands. And for a lot of the USA fans, this is a great place to start, knowing which Europeans are worth. And, if you have all the time in the world, they're all worth going to YouTube and at theraces.com and doing the tape work. But hopefully one of the things you could do on this show for the listeners, for the viewers, Vanessa, is point them in a direction, so they can start their prep work in earnest. And we'll begin on Friday with the Juvenile Turf Sprint, a race that brings in some international star power, shall we say.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, hopefully this will just be able to point the listeners in the direction of, where to start with your form guides and where to get stuck into, what you're beginning with. And in this race in particular, you need to start with the Platinum Queen. Honestly, she's been one of the stories of the season over here. She's owned by a syndicate. If you've missed it, go on YouTube, watch her winning the Abbey in Longchamp on Arc Day, and then watch the celebrations afterwards. It's incredible because there's so many syndicate members. Anyway, they'll all be coming over if she runs here, which I think this is the plan. She's trained by Richard Fahey. He's got a couple of entries. She's just been an incredible 2-year-old this season, and she's just kept on improving and improving. And then she won a Group 1 when we last saw her. Pretty impressive win. She also has form tied in with the likes of Highfield Princess, who will come to in the sprint afterwards. And this is the first time that we're going to see her go up against some of the Colts form, obviously. And we've got Persian Force taking her on. And Richard Hannon, the trainer of Persian Force, has already come out and said that this is his best chance of a Breeders' Cup winner ever, and has already booked Frankie Dettori. So that's a pretty insightful little angle in there. They've always thought the world of this horse. And he started out in March in the Brocklesby, and now he's going to finish all the way over in Keeneland in November. So he's had a really busy season. He's run into some top notches along the way, but mainly Blackbeard, who unfortunately is out. For me, I think a lot of the UK attention will be on Platinum Queen, but I genuinely think that Persian Force is going to appreciate this trip. I think he's got all the toolkits needed. He's got all the tools in his kit needed to travel and to operate around a track like this. And he's the one for me in here, I think. He's just such a consistent performer. But I should also name check the likes of Mischief Magic in here for Charlie Appleby. Excellent form in these races. Aesop's Fable for Aidan O'Brien. Dramatized. Carl Burke's filly, very interesting runner. She was excellent at Royal Ascot. Disappointed when we last saw her, but she's been off since. And Lady Hollywood in there as well for Alice Haynes, a first runner for that trainer. So loads of different angles there. But for me, hone in on Persian Force's form.
I love it. That's a great insight and something you're not going to get everywhere. I've been so obsessed with the Platinum Queen and the other interesting storylines on the USA side in this race, but definitely one to do a little bit more digging on for sure. Let's move on to the Juvenile Fillies Turf, the second of the races on Friday that will have international participation. And now you can tell me if I'm nuts or not. I've actually made my lone bet so far for the Breeders' Cup in this race. Meditate was available at 7-1. I know Aidan O'Brien does not have a good record in this race, but I just feel like watching her tape, looking at her form, looking at the figures she's earned, I thought she stood out to me a little bit. Am I oversimplifying this one?
No, I don't think you are. She's obviously the first string of the Aidan O'Brien team. They've also got Neverending Story in here. And look, Meditate's had this incredible season. She's won her first 4, including the Albany at Royal Ascot, the Debutante Stakes. And then when she's been second the last twice, she's been in the Moyglare and the Cheveley Park. And she's been beaten by Tahira, who's basically an absolute weapon. And she went and won her. She sort of Meditate went to go win her race that day in Ireland, and then Tahira just came like a rocket down the outside. I just don't think they realized they were bumping into an absolute, like I say, rocket. And then in the Cheveley Park, that was 6 furlongs, and she bumped into Lazoo that day. Lazoo would be a speedier type than Meditate. I think Meditate's going to appreciate the mile trip. I think the run style over 7 furlongs suggests that she'll be fine over this trip, and her breeding, she's by no nay never, and so but then she's got a stamina influence on the dam side as well. So I actually think the mile will really play to her strengths. She's definitely one of the main players in here from over the UK and Ireland team. Neverending Story would have to step up on what she's done more recently. Definitely a second string for the Aidan O'Brien operation. She was 3rd in the Marcel Boussac over the mile, so she does have the mile experience, but she would have to progress on from what she's done. But she will appreciate better ground, I think. Also from a breeding angle, actually, she's a first foal out of a mare called Athena, who traveled to America and won the Belmont Oaks in 2018, and actually ran in the Fillies and Mares that year as well. So a bit of an international breeding angle. Joseph O'Brien has Basil Martini. She'd need to step up. She actually took 5 starts to win, and then she won a Group 3 over the 7 furlongs. Again, will appreciate the step up to the mile, but class-wise would need to step up. And then others we should mention, Midnight Mile in there for Richard Fahey, trainer of the Platinum Queen, a real unknown in this, 2 from 2 so far, stepping up to the mile as well. Won the Oh So Sharp Stakes at a big price, but no fluke, I don't think. Loads of ability, but this is a big unknown. Spirit Gal in there again, being a bit of a revelation this season for a smaller trainer, and Willie Brown. And Dundalk, when the listed race at Dundalk, she beat Cairo that day. I didn't think there was any fluke about it. And also Manhattan Jungle in there for another small trainer in Amy Murphy. They've had a bit of an unfortunate time because American interest brought into Manhattan Jungle when he won 3, I think it was, on the bounce, pre-Royal Ascot. And then since then, his form has petered off somewhat. So yeah, her form has petered off somewhat. So yeah, she needs to step up, but I think it's all about Meditate in there. I don't think you're too far wrong, Peter.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. And Neverending Story, a little bit interesting. Didn't have the easiest of runs through, and I do like that breeding angle when it comes to horses who are going to be suited to this, what in almost all instances is a very different test than what they faced to this point. Let's pivot to the Colts version, the Juvenile Turf, a race where I think we're going to see a pretty sizable favorite in Silver Knot, horse for Charlie Appleby, who's, just come here and basically won everything the last couple of seasons. Personally, I kind of want to see what the ground is like. Really didn't love the way he moved over the softer footing. Now, it should be firm here, but you don't really know. This time of year, before I got too stuck into that run, I'd want to know what kind of ground we were running over. Very curious to get your thoughts on him and the rest of these.
Yeah, really interesting. So you've got Silver Knot in here, which will start with Victoria Road and Cairo for the Aidan O'Brien team, are the 3 UK and Irish runners, and Silver Knot for the Appleby team. Really interesting what you say there, Peter, about the ground. I've got good ground, a big positive for Silver Knot. The angle in with him is he's following a very similar route that the likes of Modern Games and Outstrip have already gone down to win this race, in terms of they go to Doncaster, then on to Newmarket, slightly different races, but a similar sort of calendar pattern. In terms of Silver Knot's Champagne run, that was a tactical, very small field affair. I don't think soft ground suited him that day. Then he went on and he won the Autumn Stakes when he was stepped up to the mile, and I thought he relished the trip that day. But it was very interesting to me that he was weak in the betting beforehand. I think that he go off 4-1. I should have that to hand. I think he was 4-1 on the day. Now that, for Charlie Appleby's runner in that race, the yard was firing on all cylinders. This horse had the profile of a horse to win the race, basically, trained by a man who was in red hot form at the time, and he was so weak in the betting. I thought that was very odd. I don't know why. I don't have an angle in as to why, but I just thought that was a little bit weird. But in terms of the way he won the Autumn Stakes, he was so strong at the line, and his form going back really stacks up, because Chaldine in the Champagne Stakes from Doncaster has gone on to win the Dewhurst, Epictetus and the Holloway Boy, Frank the Form from Newmarket when they went to the Futurity at Doncaster. So it's all these 2-year-old lines and form lines coming in here. But the form is pretty rock solid. And I think there's so much more to come from him over this trip. He travels so strongly. I'm a really big fan of his, and I'm all over him for this race. I'm not backing away from that now, but I don't want to see too much rain. I was concerned about his run in the Champagne. I think the ground was to blame that day. And so we don't want too much rain for Silver Knot. That would be a big concern. Should mention the others, both Cairo and Victoria Road were basically, to be a bit haphazard about it, would need to step up on what they've done so far. Victoria Road only shed his maiden tag at the 5th time of asking, when he was stepped up to the mile for the first time. He's since won in Deauville in a listed race, and then Chantilly as well in the Group 3 over the 9 furlongs. I just don't think he's one of the absolute top notches, and I'd like to think that Silver Knot is a classier horse than him. And as for Cairo, he has a slightly funny profile, actually. He kind of disappointed when he was expected to win in that Dundalk race that the filly won. But back on track when we last saw him, but again, would need to step up on what he's done so far as he steps up to the mile.
Let's talk about the turf sprint. I think a simplistic reading of this race makes it look like a match between Golden Pal and Highfield Princess. But from the quick looks that I've done at some of the other invaders, maybe it's not so simple as that. Really curious to get your thoughts on this one.
It's head and heart, Highfield Princess. For all you American listeners out there, this is it. This is the story of the meeting for me anyway. She's just incredible. She started out with this lowly rating. She's climbed up through the ranks. She's now a 5-year-old, and she's become this sprinting sensation for a relatively small Yorkshire yard. It's such a special story. She's owned and bred by a friend of mine in John Fairley. He's actually the man to blame for me being in horse racing. He used to run the old Channel 4 racing, and he gave me my first bit of work experience. I fell in love with the media game, and he helped me along in the very early stages. Now he's owned and bred this Group 1 winner. She's won 3 Group 1s at the Currow, York and Deauville, 6 furlongs, 5 furlongs, any ground you like. Go back, you American guys, go back and watch her winning the Currow race last time out at the Group 1 there. She just travels so strongly. Jason Hart literally had to take a pull with about a furlong to go so that she didn't just absolutely take off. It's strange to say about a 5-year-old, but she's still improving. And honestly, I don't know on that evidence last time out if her improvement has actually stopped yet over the sprinting trips. So we could even see, who's to say that she's actually reached the ceiling yet? Because she's just got better and better with each run. This trip isn't going to be a problem. Whatever the ground comes up isn't going to be a problem. She's straightforward. She pings the lids. She travels on the bridle. And then when a jockey asks her to go, she goes. She's not only the sort of heart selection, but she's also the head selection here. But we should mention the Appleby runners. You've got Creative Force in there and Naval Crown for Charlie Appleby Godolphin team. Both both excellent sprinters in their own right. Creative Force, he ran well behind Kinross in the champion sprint when we last saw him, and he won that race 12 months ago. I'm not sure he's going to be suited by this trip particularly. And Naval Crown won the Platinum Jubilee at Royal Ascot, but has been a bit wide of the mark more recently, as seems to have gone off the boil and has been beaten by the likes of Kinross, Creative Force, Emirati Allen, and Anna and Highfield Princess, all reopposed in this race. So he'd have to reverse the form with all of them. Flotus, Go Bears Go, and Emirati Anna all have entries as well. All of them would need to step up to get close to Highfield Princess.
One race that's had a ton of international success and brings certainly a deep contingent this year is the Filly and Mare Turf. Really curious to see where your eye is drawn looking out at this plethora of entries.
Yeah, we've got a really decent bunch here. So just to recap the entries, you've got Nashua for the Gosden team, Tuesday and Toy for Aidan O'Brien, Above the Curve for Joseph O'Brien. Dreamloper has an entry, but will go to the mile. And Saffron Beach is in there as well, as well as Mise en Scène too. But really, the ones we need to focus in on are Nashua, particularly. So she's this two-time Group 1 winner. The 10 furlongs is her ideal trip. She went down half a length in the Opera when we last saw her. Above the Curve was behind her that day. I think getting back on better ground is going to really suit her. She's just a top-notch operator over the 10 furlongs, and I genuinely think there's still improvement to come over this trip. The word from the Gosden team has been very positive about her in the build-up to the Breeders' Cup. She'd be a big story. Holly Doyle is the retained jockey for the owner, Imad Al-Sagar, and that would be a huge story as well. Well, it will be a huge story around the Breeders' Cup. But I've been a massive fan of her. She didn't stay in the Oaks. This 10 furlong trip is her ideal. She's taking on again Tuesday, who's the Oaks winner, and Nashua was behind her in third that day. But this Tuesday hasn't really progressed on from that classic victory. I'm not entirely sure what's sort of gone amiss with her. I'm kind of a bit puzzled by Tuesday at the moment, but she remains a top notcher. She remains a very high class individual. I think it's really interesting that despite the fact her form is a little bit petered off, maybe, they've still decided to keep her in training, to keep her going for this race. I just think that's, you're talking about a master here, and if he's bringing a horse over, we know that they've got a chance. Essentially, it's a bit of a cliche to say it, but it is true. The 10 furlongs as well about Tuesday, a question mark there. I think really the 12 furlongs is her ideal. And then the other horse I really want to give a proper mention to is Above the Curve, who finished behind Nashua in France. Wait till you see her. This horse is a beauty. She's an absolute beauty. She's big and she's gorgeous to look at. I mean, if you were to have a painting of a horse, it would look like Above the Curve, I personally think. And she won off a break at the Curragh, carrying a Group 1 penalty and a Group 2 that day. I thought she'd tighten up for that run, but she didn't really step forward when we saw her last time out in France. Little bit of a question mark there. I will Nashua be able to frank the form with Above the Curve is the angle in. But she's a filly that I'm very, very fond of. I just wonder if in time we might see better from Above the Curve over further.
Sounds like a fair set of assumptions heading into this year's filly and mare turf. So yeah, Nashua I think is going to end up being a pretty sizable favorite, and I'm not really being pushed off that idea from you that that's the right place in the market. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. She ticks the boxes. When I try and look at these races and I have boxes to tick, and they include ground, trip, form, ability to travel, all those things that we all take into consideration when we're having a bet. And she ticks more boxes than anything else in this race. She ticks more of those boxes than any of the horses we've just spoken about.
I said to a friend the other day that if you just covered up the name and showed the form, it just looks like the form of a filly and mare turf winner for that one. Let's talk Breeders' Cup Mile. We've got a real two-way clash at the head of the market right now between Kinross and Modern Games. After the Modern Games run at Woodbine, I thought it was possible he might even be odds-on in that race. But as I've mentioned elsewhere, a couple of important things have happened since then. He ran again, which wasn't unexpected, wasn't expected, but is a valuable piece of information. And then, of course, Kinross coming here, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. Is it those two and everybody else, and how do you separate them? What does the team look like in general?
This is a really interesting race. So we've got Order of Australia in here, who's back. He obviously won this race 2 years ago now. Modern Games, as you touched upon, Dreamloper, the mare in there for Ed Walker, really interesting angle with her. Bayside Boy won the QE2 at Ascot when we last saw him. Kinross, of course, stepping up in trip. Pogo as well. Saffron Beach, but she probably will go in the fillies and mare turf. But in terms of the two you've spoken about, I mean, I am surprised that Kinross is a similar price or as close in the market with Modern Games as he is. For me, I know he's coming in here in excellent form, but he's coming in here he sort of was a 7 furlong specialist early on. Well, no, he is a 7 furlong specialist, and then he won over a shorter trip when we last saw him. He's now stepping back up in trip. I mean, he's so versatile, but I just think Modern Games is a classier horse over this trip in these sort of circumstances. That's my angle in here. Obviously, he won the juvenile turf in Del Mar. The Woodbine Mile win was very good, I thought. Then, yeah, a bit of a surprise they turned around, took him to Ascot. And that was an only okay run, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not getting excited about that QE2 form. Bayside Boy could reoppose again, has the entry here. He won it at a big price. Inspiral messed up the start, didn't really operate. I'm just questioning, look, quote me on it in a year's time. I just don't think that QE2 form, it was a weak race going into the QE2, and it felt like an even weaker race coming out of it. So I have that Modern Games run as a negative, really. For me, he needs to sort of step forward / bounce back, if you get me, from that effort. I wasn't impressed with that. But the track will be a positive. The trip is a positive. He's well travelled. He's already beaten a few of the horses in here. There's plenty of boxes ticked, going back to that sort of analogy. I'm just questioning that last time out effort with him. And then, I should mention Dreamloper, for example. Ed Walker, great for Ed Walker to have a runner in here. This horse had a terrific season, 5-year-old now, but has really sort of progressed on in not quite similar fashion to Highfield Princess, but a mare in the same age, got better with age, given that bit of time. She's been a really consistent filly, and she's risen to a mark of 120 now. She's a well-travelled, straightforward individual. There might be something a bit sharper over the mile trip than her, but I wouldn't have her out. I think she'll run a pretty solid race. Pogo, expect to go off in front like he normally does. I would have thought James Doyle will ride Pogo in this because Kieran Schumacher will be on Dreamloper. Bayside Boy, Kinross already mentioned. It's an interest. This is one of the more This is, for me, the most interesting race in the build-up in terms of the European runners. This is one of the most interesting races for me.
The good thing is we don't have to hold your feet to the fire here for a selection. You're going to be here with us, Breeders' Cup Week. We'll get a chance to see these in the flesh, maybe get somewhat of an idea of how they've adapted, and there'll be time to hold the feet to the fire and force you to give a selection later on. But we've got one more race to talk about in terms of international participation, and it's the big one, the Breeders' Cup Turf, Charlie Appleby, with 2 serious-looking chances at the top of the market here.
Yeah, so obviously won the race last year with Your Beer, has Rebels Romance and Nation's Pride in here for running for the Godolphin team. So Rebel Romance, 4 from 4 this season, and that includes 2 German Group 1s. He's sort of well-travelled. He's improving. He stays the 1 mile 4 so well. His form probably isn't out the top draw. That German form, I think that's fair to say that it's not out the top draw. But he's progressing all the time, and he's just got the look of a horse who could really relish this sort of trip and track, the 1 mile 4 around here, around Keeneland. I just think that's going to really suit him. And as for Nation's Pride, well, you go back to the Epsom Derby, he was well fancied to win the Epsom Derby. He didn't fire on that day, but his international record more recently at Belmont, winning the Saratoga Derby, is excellent. He's really excelled over this trip at Belmont, and his only blot in the copybook is that Epsom run, and you're happy to forgive him that, given the track. I mean, we talk about it all the time, but it is literally like a roller coaster. He didn't perform there. Well, that's fine. Other than that, he's been a really solid horse. I think Charlie's got 2 excellent chances here with Rebels Romance and Nation's Pride. Broome in there, second in the race last year to Your Beer. Doesn't come here in quite the same form, I think it's fair to say, for Aidan O'Brien than he did last year. Mishriff seems to have gone off the boil somewhat, would need to bounce back. So, yeah, I think it's definitely about the boys in blue for this race. And you're not asking me for a selection anyway, so I won't put one away.
You can keep that in your back pocket for now. But I will ask you this tough question, because I don't think it's been announced at this stage. Who's William Buick going to ride?
I do not know, but I did speak to James Doyle at Newcastle. He had a winner up there, went all the way up to Newcastle for 1 ride, 1 winner. He's riding brilliantly. So, he had that injury. He's was it wrist or thumb, but he was off for 7 weeks. Since he's come back, he's just riding really well. He's really sort of like, you can just see the fire is burning. Obviously, he's second string in theory, but we've seen switches happen. William Buick doesn't always get it right. And James Doyle seemed very much in this race. He didn't seem to be, I didn't get the impression he would mind who he was on. I think it's very much a view of, we've got 2 good chances here, so I'll pick up whatever William doesn't ride. And I don't think it'll be that much of a it wouldn't be that much of a shock if James was to be in the winner's enclosure and William wasn't, would it?
No, that makes sense. I do feel like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but just looking at the form, Nation's Pride is the one, like, if Buick didn't choose, I'd see maybe as a little bit more of a negative, just because it feels like the one he's supposed to choose. But I agree, in any case, they don't always get it right, and either could win. But that is a little bit of signal maybe that I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think, the obvious angle in with Nation's Pride's American form lines coming into this makes him the obvious selection for William Buick. But the Rebels Romance sort of trajectory and how it's been progressing, yes, the form isn't as fancy or as sexy as Nation's Pride's form, but you just wouldn't know where his improvement's going to end. So yeah, I think, look, to recap, I think William Buick is probably more likely to ride Nation's Pride, but Rebel Romance is no rank outsider anyway.
Fantastic stuff, Vanessa. There's so much more I want to talk to you about, but we've got time. We'll save it. We got, a lot of time between now and the Breeders' Cup, though not that much. But we appreciate you joining us today. One of the few days where England seems considerably cozier, shall we say, than a racetrack side during the flat season in the USA.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like unseasonably mild over here at the moment, and we've had some nice weather. I'm cozied up at home, and now the entries are out. This is it. I'll be knuckled down to the laptop for a couple of days, really focusing in on all things Breeders' Cup form, and then on the flight out on Monday. I cannot wait.
It's going to be great. And based on what you've been able to accomplish with, basically off the cuff here in this pre-entry show, really looking forward to your more studied thoughts as we get closer and closer to the big day. Vanessa, Ryle, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
That's going to do it for this episode of In the Money Players Podcast, Breeders' Cup Daily. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.